I'm surprised, said Hugh Montague, that Howard permitted you to visit Washington in his stead. He so looks forward to popping in. There's not a good door he doesn't knock upon to offer his chirpy hello. Well, the mission I'm on doesn't appeal to him, I answered. The Frente leaders have to take care of their needy, and I'm here to scrounge up some welfare. It takes time, and you don't get much in the way of results. Guns, not butter, I can hear our paramilitary cry. How much do you need? 10,000 might be good for Frente morale. It will enable our leaders to make a few small gifts. Piss on Frente morale. I wouldn't trust your Cuban leaders. Harry, I'll help you despite them. I look forward to confounding Howard with your fundraising abilities. Then he'll send you up to get more. You and I can restore our somewhat rusted links. He had been just this affable through drinks in the entree. We did not speak of Kittredge nor of son Christopher, but otherwise it was as if we had been seeing each other often. Yes, he said, I'll get you the money. I did not have to ask how. It was accepted rumor that Allen Dulles put away pots of funds in the nooks and floorboards of every branch, division, and directorate. Harlot, I was certain, kept the maps. It's nice to visit a man who only has to make one phone call, I said, but the air went dead on my flattery. Why did you sign up for this Cuban business? He asked. I believe in it, I answered. My voice, unhappily, was dogged in my ears. It could be a most direct way of fighting communism. He snorted. Our purpose is to undermine communism, not to martyr it. We don't have to fight them. I'm aghast. Have you learned nothing from me? I learned a lot. I halted. I learned a lot, I said, and then I didn't have any contact with the instructor. You could always count on the cold benefit of being able to look directly into his eyes. They were devoid of incidental affection. Well, he said, you are a tricky case. I don't want to waste you, and don't know how to use you. That in sum is why I've let you dangle. He hawked his throat. All hope, however, said Harlot, is not dead. Lately I've had a thought or two in your direction. On the flight to Washington, I had had ample time to recognize how much it had cost to stay out of touch with him for so long. Well, I answered, I won't say I am not ready to listen. Oh, no, not yet, he said, pushing away dessert to light a Churchill. After a first puff, he reached again into his breast pocket to offer me one. Were his brand of Churchills the best Havanas ever made? Puffing on his gift, I understood Cuba better. Perfumed facalities blended with honor and iron will. Alchemy lurked in the nicotine. Oh, no, not yet, he repeated. I don't want to let go of Cuba just yet. Do you have any idea of what a comedy is cooking? Well, I hope not. Prepare for a farce. Cuba is going to be our penance for Guatemala. It can't be helped. Likeable Ike has not read Martin Buber. Well, neither have I. Read him. Buber's Tales of the Hasidim, perfect. Enables you to dazzle visitors from the Mossad. Those beady Israeli eyes go moist when I quote Martin Buber, their fellow Jew. May I ask how Buber is relevant to Cuba? He's relevant. There's a nicely balanced tale he tells of this poor, infertile, married woman who is so obsessed with having a child that she travels across half of the Ukraine on foot in order to meet a traveling rabbi. In the late 18th century, these gentlemen called Hasids were not unlike our evangelists, and they used to make tours through the Russian hinterland, accompanied by a horde of followers. An Hasidic rabbi would wend his way from ghetto town to ghetto town, accompanied invariably by a brilliantly handsome and seductive wife. The Jewish women, unlike our more pagan Christian cheerleaders, were always drawn to the power of the intellect, which in this near-medieval situation centered, you may be certain, on the rabbi. In our tale, the sad, barren Jewish housewife has to travel endless versts across primitive country, beset by every sort of riffraff. But she does reach her goal, whereupon our peripatetic eminence blesses her. Go home to your husband, he says, and you will have a child. She returns safely, conceives, and 9 months later delivers a bouncing babe. Naturally, another woman in her village, desirous of the same result, decides in the following year to make the same trip. This time the rabbi says, "Alas, I can do nothing for you, my dear. You have heard the story." Moral: we won't take Cuba in the same manner we rolled up those Guatemalan communists. I said as much to Howard Hunt. Pity you don't tend to your words. He sniffed at his cigar smoke as if somewhere in the center of the cloud was a line between judgments good and bad. I can understand why Eisenhower is off his feed. That business last month when Gary Powers was shot down is you too. Likeable Ike caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Khrushchev cussing him out for all the world to hear. And then the Negro sit-ins. That must have deranged him a bit. He keeps talking about Cuba as the black hole of Calcutta, said Hugh Montague, sipping his brandy. I had often noted that a trip to a restaurant with Harlot had to obey its signal forms. The check was carefully calculated out for our separate shares. Coffee and Hennessy always concluded the repast, and he never seemed to care how long lunch took. I asked Kittredge about that once, and she laughed sadly and said, "Hugh works on such days until midnight." By the manner in which he now turned the end of his cigar in an ashtray, his fingers dancing lightly on the shaft, I could see that lunch at Harvey's would go on for a while. Once again, we had become the last table on our part of the floor. "What do you think of this place?" Hugh asked me. "Adequate," I replied. "It's J. Edgar Hoover's favorite joint, so one shouldn't expect better. But then I've decided lately to keep switching my midday endroit. Makes it more difficult for others to keep up with your conversation. And I do have a sensitive matter to discuss." He was coming at last to the point of our meeting. As I had observed from attending a few poetry readings at Yale, good voices do not offer the best stuff first. "I want," he said, "to get right to the point. What would you think of resigning from CIA?" "Oh, no. I had a whole unhappy recall of the time he told me not to do any more rock climbing." "Don't cross before you see the road. I'm going to propose a venture so secret that if I have misjudged your reliability, you will know too much. So put aside all your notions of how we keep the secrets. It's not by the aid of all those fenced-in kraals and coops. Forget them, they leak. But here and there is a coffer where we do hold some real stuff. From our inception, Allen, in close conjunction with a few of us, has kept one operation sacrosanct. We have a few officers who never did get to put their name on a 201 file. No payment, no paper. Most special fellows. Allen's term. I want you to become a most special fellow." He did tap his glass lightly while whispering these last remarks to me. "For instance," he went on in a whisper, "if our Harry Hubbard were to resign now from the agency, one could underwrite a quick 12-month course with highly respectable pay by a prestigious Wall Street brokerage house, followed by assignment as a customer's man to some very good clients. Most special fellow would then, under the guidance of more practiced hands, manage certain selected fortunes until he had learned the business for himself. That would enable him to enjoy the career of a rising stockbroker for the rest of his life, an agent in place. Over a long career, most special fellows are used sparingly. I promise you, however, that one can serve to extraordinary purpose on those special occasions when the work is needed. You might be out there stirring huge cauldrons of international finance while blessed with a cover nigh impenetrable." I did not trust this presentation. I was thinking it was a hell of a way to be told you ought to resign. He must have picked up my sentiment, for he added, "If you wish a little muzak to accompany the proposition, I will add that we only make this offer to young men we deem extraordinarily talented when," he held up a forefinger, "when they are not concomitantly gifted with those bureaucratic skills and calculating spirit so requisite to doing a proper job within the formal structure. Alan needs a few of our best people out there ready to lend a covert shoulder to the wheel. Do you have the courtesy to feel honored by the seriousness of this offer?" "I would be," I said slowly, "but do you know, I enjoy the daily routine of the company. I don't believe I would be as devoted to bonds and margins. I'd rather take my chances here." "You might not do all that well. Your temperament is to work alone rather than on a team." "I don't really care how high I climb. I don't think ambition is my guiding principle." "What then do you look for among us?" I thought for a moment. "Some extraordinary job that I alone might be able to bring off," I was surprised to hear myself say. "You feel ready for the exceptional?" I nodded. Whether I did or did not, I nodded. He was, as always, impenetrable, but I began to suspect that he had known I would not want to become a stockbroker. Perhaps he had been marinating me in a throwaway, so that my powers of rejection would be softened. The next proposal came soon enough. "I've got another of these ex officio jobs for you," he said, "and this one, I hope, you won't turn down. You will, of course, have to take it on in addition to all of Hunt's precious stuff. I assume it's to report only to you." "Depend on that. You will keep no official records." Holding his cigar in the three-finger bridge one forms around a pool cue, he tapped his middle finger lightly on the cloth, so lightly as not to dislodge the ash. "You understand, of course, that Alan does keep me around to serve as a floating spirit of investigation, and that does get one in and out of some places in the company." "Hugh," I ventured, "everyone knows you have a pipeline into everything." "The legend may be mightier than the few pipes laid," he said, and his fingers kept tapping the cigar until the ash looked ready to go, whereupon he twirled it to his plate. "Of course, I have Gould." That was worth a pause. "And Gould does keep up with the FBI. I sometimes have a good idea of what J. Edgar Buddha is tucking into his private files." I had an odd reaction. It seemed excessive. The hair stirred on the back of my neck. I felt as if we were two priests alone at a refectory table, and he was showing me the key to the sacred closet where our relics were stored. I did not know if his confidence was sacrilegious, but I was powerfully and somewhat agreeably disturbed. He had touched my inclination to get into things others did not know. I understood at last why he put up with me. If I had not a fraction of his talent, I was at least one of the few people who might share his fervor. "I will," said Harlot, "furnish more information so soon as you accomplish the first element in your task." "I know I'm ready," I said. "You will have to strike up acquaintance with a certain young lady whose activities so intrigue J. Edgar Buddha that he has surrounded her with taps. Given the candor with which she talks into her telephone, it is obvious she does not know that she is sitting well within the shadow cast by Buddha's huge posterior. One might think of her as a damsel in distress, except one can't. She's too enterprisingly promiscuous." "A call girl?" "Oh, no, just an airline stewardess. But she's managed to get herself wrapped into liaison with a couple of prominent gentlemen who don't add up when taken together." "Is either of these men American?" "Both, I assure you." "Both. May I ask why the agency is involved?" "It's not. Except for Gould. Let us say that Gould is interested because Buddha is interested. Buddha may yet have to be considered as much of a threat to the United States as Joseph Stalin ever dreamed of being in the old days." "You're not suggesting that Hoover is a Soviet agent?" "Heavens, no, just one hell of an agent for himself. Jehovah incarnated, cares only about his own hegemony. I suppose he would like to control the country altogether. I was recalling an evening when Harlot had given me his sense of our duty. It was to become the mind of America. I see I will have to take a great deal on faith, I said. Only until you get to know this airline stewardess. Once you succeed, I will offer you entry to the material. I have FBI tapes on the girl, and what a tale they tell. You know how to tease a subject. It's yours, I promise you, once you meet the mermaid and, hook her. In case I was not appreciative of the verb, he added, the deeper, the better. What does she look like? He reached into his breast pocket and brought out a color snapshot taken probably from a moving car. The features were a bit blurred. All I could discern was a good-looking girl with a nice figure and black hair. I don't know that I would want to depend on an identification from this picture, I told him. It's close enough. You'll meet her, you see, on your plane back to Miami. She's working in the first-class section of the 4:50 flight on Eastern tonight, and I'll bump your return ticket up and find a way to bill the extra disbursement. She's based in Miami? There is the beauty of it. And if I get to know her well, you will be as amazed by our country as I am. Whatever do you mean? Well, we're all stuffed with these incredible radio and TV romances. Trashy novels. Not us, but you know, them. Our fellow Americans, all that love glut and plot pollution. But when it comes to the real stuff, our Lord is more of a commercial novelist than the novelists. This is one hell of a story. It even surprises me. He was to tell me more before we broke lunch at 3:30 p.m. The young lady's name was Modine Murphy. Her nickname was Mo. Her father was half Irish, half German, and her mother of French and Dutch descent. She was 23 years old, and her parents had a little money. How was it made, I asked. Oh, said Harlot, the father is a skilled machinist who patented some kind of valve for motorcycle intakes just after the war, sold the patent, and retired. Modine, he went on, had grown up in a rich suburb of Grand Rapids, where her family was, if not respected, accepted at least for their money. She's some sort of minor debutante, said Harlot. The Midwestern sort. Of course, there's neither enough money nor enough of anything else for them to have any idea of how far away they really are from everything. I suspect being a stewardess gives her some sense of social balance, although I am really at a small loss to explain her choice of occupation. What makes you think I'll get along with Modine Murphy, I asked. I've no idea you will. But your father, remember, used to be good at this sort of thing in OSS days. Perhaps a spark will trot across the gap. Yes, he said, and one more bit of news. One would like to keep it simple, but I'm afraid we have to give you another name. We won't be able to backstop it either, since you are definitely not getting into our records on this. But I can obtain some rudimentary pocket litter for you, and yes, even a credit card. You'll need that to squire the lady around. Let me keep Harry for a first name, I said. I'd like to react naturally to her. Yes, he said, Harry. What's your mother's maiden name? Silverfield. Is that considered Jewish? No, I said. Well, let's make it Field in any event. Harry Field. Should be easy to incorporate. I did not know whether I felt promoted or debased, now that I had 3 names. It's hard to say that I would have brought off the first leg of my mission if not for a curious piece of luck. In the eastern waiting area, just before boarding my plane, I encountered Sparker Boone, an old classmate from St. Matthew's, one of our lesser lights. He was built like a pear and armed with buck teeth. He had now added a premature bald spot to the back of his thin, sandy hair. Of course, I had no wish to go down to Miami with Bradley Sparker Boone when I was hoping to present myself as Harry Field. but on boarding the plane I could find no way to avoid his invitation to sit with him, since first class was half empty. I had to content myself with obtaining the aisle seat. He told me soon enough that he had become a photographer for Life magazine and was on his way to Miami to photograph some of the leading Cuban exiles. Before I could digest how worrisome from an agency point of view this news might be, since Life, Kittredge had also assured me, was considered by us to be somewhat less dependable than Time, he added, "I hear you're in the CIA." "God, no," I said. "What gave you that idea?" "The grapevine. St. Matt's." "Someone is playing fast and loose with my name," I told him. "Why, I'm a sales rep for an electronics company." I was about to present the evidence when I recollected that Robert Charles happened to be the name in little raised letters on my business card. My only excuse for such near carelessness was that I was prodigiously distracted. To my small panic, both stewardesses in the first-class section fit Harlot's description. They had dark hair and were attractive. I did not feel ready to settle into a conversation until I made certain which girl was Modine Murphy. The answer, however, soon declared itself. One stewardess was carefully groomed and well-featured. The other was striking enough to be a movie star. As she went up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts and overhead compartments, she looked much pleased with herself, and tended to passengers' needs with a subtle contempt, as if there was something second-rate about having needs to begin with. She did not seem to belong to her job so much as to be an actress in a role. The worst of it was that I thought her looks were marvelous. Her hair was as dark as Kittredge's, and her eyes were a brilliant and insolent green, ready to suggest that she would compete with you over everything from an early morning run down a powder trail to the first knock in gin rummy. She had a figure described immediately by Sparker as, quote, "a body I would kill for," end quote. Sparker, with his wife and bald spot and 2 daughters, their snapshots already presented to me. Yes, Sparker, with his house in Darien, still ready to kill for possession of Modine Murphy. Yes, I had the right girl. The nameplate pinned to her breast, which I glimpsed when she stopped to tell me to strap my safety belt, was confirmation. I started to take off my jacket. "Could you hang this up, miss?" I asked. "Put it on your lap for now," she said. "We're about to take off." And without a glance to see what kind of man might be attached to the voice, moved to her bucket seat. Once we were in the air, I had to ring for her. She picked up my jacket and was gone. It was Sparker who gained her interest. With a knowing grin, as if the procedure had been successfully tested before, he reached to the floor, set his camera bag on his lap, and proceeded to load film, first into a Leica, then a Hasselblad. She was back before he was done. "Can I ask you," she said, "who do you work for?" "Life magazine," said Sparker. "I knew it," she said. She called to the other stewardess. "What did I say, Netta, when this one," pointing to Sparker, "came on the plane?" "You said he's a photographer for Life or Look." "How could you tell?" asked Sparker. "I can always tell." "What would you have said was my occupation?" I asked. "I didn't give it consideration," she answered. She was leaning over me to get her face closer to Life photographer Boone. "How long are you going to be in Miami?" she inquired. "About a week." "I want to ask you some questions. I don't like the way my pictures come out." "I can help you on that," he said. "You seem very serious about photography," I added. She looked at me for the first time, but presented no more answer than the smallest turn of her lip. "Where," she asked Sparker, "are you going to stay in Miami?" "At the Saxony," he said, "in Miami Beach." She made a face. "The Saxony," she said. "You know all these hotels well?" he asked. "Of course." When she came back, she handed him a slip. "You can get me at that number, or I may call you at the Saxony." "Whew," he said so soon as she moved down the aisle again. I watched her talking with animation to a businessman in a silk suit whose manicured nails gleamed from 3 seats away. It took no more than that to put me in depression. I had been keyed on this meeting for the last few hours. With all I had done and not done in my life, I had certainly never picked up a girl before. The iron hand of St. Matt's was still upon me, I felt helpless before this Modine Murphy, since by comparison to myself she seemed incredibly sophisticated and abysmally ignorant. Hardly a fit. "Sparker, let me have the girl's number," I said. "Oh, I can't do that," he told me. Back at St. Matt's, he'd been easy to bully. Memories returned of chastening him in a headlock. Now, meeting ostensibly as equal adults, he would try to prove stubborn. "I've got to have it," I said. "Why?" "I feel as if I've met someone who will mean a great deal to me." "Yes," he said under my stare, "I can let you have her phone number." "I can tell. She is not the girl for me." His breath was sour as he spoke to my ear. "She looks awfully expensive." "Do you believe one has to pay her?" He shook his head. "No, but these stewardesses demand a very good time if they give you a date. I can't feel comfortable spending that kind of money when my wife and children can use it." "That makes a strong case," I said. "Yes," he said. "But what will you do for me?" "You might name it." "I want a contact with a good Cuban hooker. I hear they are unforgettable in bed." I had an image of Sparker Boone stroking his bone on the recollection through the sere and golden years. "What makes you think I can take care of something like that?" I asked. "You're CIA. You have that sort of knowledge at your fingertips." It was not altogether untrue. I could ask one or two of the exile leaders. They would have at the least a friend in the business of brothels. "Well, I will take care of it," I said. "You have my word. But you have to do something else for me." "What?" "You're getting the better of the bargain as it is." "Not at all," I said. "You have to watch out for Cuban hookers. The worst can be venal and ill-spirited." I was improvising. "The ground has to be prepared. I will take pains to have you introduced to your Cuban date as the friend of a very influential man. That will make a big difference." "All right," he said. "I go along with that. But what is this something else you want me to do for you?" "Speak positively about me to Modine Murphy. You obviously have her attention." He frowned. He had his own kind of authority after all. "You are not an easy sell," he said. "Why? Why not?" "Because she has made up her mind about you." "Yes? And what has she determined?" "That you have no money." I felt reduced again by the thought of Modine Murphy. "Sparker," I told him, "you'll find the way when you talk to her." He pondered this just long enough to suggest that he might also remember the headlock I used to put on him. "I think I have a handle," he said. "Yes?" "I'll tell her," he held up his palm, "that while you won't admit it, you're CIA." "This is the damn stupidest thing I ever heard of," I burst out. "Why would that interest her?" But I knew the answer. "If it's not money," he opined, "then it has to be adventure. I know because life has the same cathexis as CIA for a lot of women." It was coming in on me again that my plane ticket was in the name of Harry Field. I would have to be introduced to her by that name. My stomach was upset. Bad enough for Sparker to be convinced I was an agency man. Now I would be demonstrating it. The agency rule of thumb, I reminded myself, was to hold out. Hold out at all costs. "Boone," I said, "I have to let you in on something. I am in electronics, but I don't work in Miami. My shop is in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm going down to Miami to see a married woman whose husband is very jealous." Weighty stuff. Very. My lady friend warned me not to use my real name. Her husband works for an airline, so he has access to passenger lists. She says he could not be held accountable if he found out I had come down to Miami. So I booked myself in as Harry Field. "Harry Field," I repeated. "Why in tarnation do you want the stewardess's phone number if you have a woman in Miami already?" He actually had to reach into the side flap of his safari jacket and take out the piece of paper to read her name. "Why this Modine Murphy?" he concluded. "Because I'm struck by her. I can warrant that it never happened to me in this manner before." He shook his head. "What name should I give her?" When I told him, he savored the moment by having me spell it. Harry Field, I heard myself saying. The flight had entered on a bumpy course. For the next hour, no one could quit his seat. By the time we came into clear night sky, the trip was into its last half hour. He went up then to the galley, and I could see him talking to Modine Murphy. They laughed together a few times, and once she looked at me. Then he came back to his seat for the descent. "Mission wholly accomplished," he said. "What did you tell her?" "You don't want to hear, you'll only deny it." He smiled in such a way as to tell me that if he was going to do a job, he certainly did it well. "I gave her to understand," he said at last, "that Harry Field is the best in his line of work, given this kind of occupation." Did she believe it? The moment you even hint at secret work, the suspension of disbelief is total. He was right. After we landed, she came up with my jacket and handed it to me wordlessly. Her eyes were shining. In that instant, I learned the true force of a cliché. My heart leaped tangibly in my chest. "May I call you?" I asked at the door to the plane. "You don't know my number," she whispered. "I'll find a way," I said, and walked off quickly. Sparker was waiting in the exit lounge. He had an invoice to collect. "What is the name of that Cuban girl you are going to introduce me to?" Not until I offered my vow that I would leave a message for him tomorrow at the Saxony would he surrender Modine's address to me. She was staying at the Fontainebleau. Someone, he assured me before we separated, has to be picking up her bill. I took a moment to look again at him. I might be a poor excuse for a salesman of electronic products, but he was certainly out of focus as a photographer for life. So soon as we separated in the terminal, I bought a copy of the magazine and turned to the masthead. He was not listed under the photographers, but his name did appear among the photo editors. He was half a fraud. That cheered me. Modine Murphy did not have so formidable an eye after all. I was employing just this thought to underwrite my confidence when I called her room at the Fontainebleau next morning. She was as sweet, however, as when she had called goodbye to me at the airplane door. "I'm glad you called," she said. "I really want to talk to you." She sighed, although not unhappily. "I think I need some kind of wise man to confide in," she said. Then she laughed. "You know, an expert." She had a gutty little laugh that proved agreeable, as if something unpolished in her was very much there to discover. She had been out late last night, she explained, and would be shopping all day. She had another date for tonight, but I have a window from 5 to 6:30 and can fit you in there.